Hey guys, David here with a real quick review of Blade Runner 2049, mainly because I've never been that much in love with Blade Runner because I've never seen Blade Runner up until 2 days prior to filming this review in order to really catch up and get involved with the mythology and as to why it is that this movie demanded so many different cuts to get it just right, because Blade Runner is infamous for having so many different interpretations of the film, from the director's cut by Ridley Scott to the final cut to the theatrical cut that apparently had some annoying narration. I finally managed to watch the film, sit down with it, really digest it, and really try to absorb what everybody else was marveling at with that original film to prep for Blade Runner 2049, which really captured my attention, not only because of how they're bringing back this property that is rather beloved over the times, because initially it wasn't a humongous success, Blade Runner, when it first came out back in 1982, directed by Ridley Scott, but over time it kind of gained a little bit of a cult status. So much so that it warranted a sequel, and people got stoked seeing Harrison Ford back, seeing all the traditional things that make up the Blade Runner mythology, but now we got Ryan Gosling, Jared Leto, and just so many other cast members being involved in a new time period where a young Blade Runner unravels a secret that ties into the original Blade Runner and also kind of ushers in something brand new that needs to be taken care of before it's too late. I guess you could argue the less that you know about the plot of this film, the better, because there's just so much to kind of unravel and really digest about this film. Similar to the original, because having seen the original Blade Runner, finally, after all these years of missing out on it, finally sat down with the final cut of Blade Runner. I can honestly say that I liked the film a lot, but I didn't love it as much as other people did, because I do think that it was a little slow at times. It was much more busy being atmospheric over actually delivering a story that had like twists and turns that really kept me engaged, but it was still very beautiful to look at, and it still established something about its atmosphere and about its way it's designed, how it kind of looked at the future, and really tackled its source material that was interesting. One thing that I can never knock down Blade Runner for is that it's not a conversation starter, because it really is. Whether you like the movie or not, there's always something within the plot that you look at, and if you watch the movie with a friend or a neighbor or somebody, you can always have a conversation about that subject material, about replicants or people that aren't exactly human and are bred or created, whether or not they have a soul, whether or not they have emotion, that kind of stuff. And Blade Runner 2049 takes that subject material and makes it just a little bit much more personal with its characters, particularly Ryan Gosling and all the other people that are kind of involved with his story. It's all about what's the internal struggle with these characters, having dealt with the repercussions that happen in between Blade Runner 1 and 2. Which leads me to the next thing that I really want to tackle, that I think is actually very vital and important. Do you have to see the original Blade Runner like I did in order to really comprehend the story that's happening with Blade Runner 2049? My answer, to be honest, is no, because I conducted an experiment, have you? I went and saw the movie with my girlfriend. It was me and my girlfriend. And I actually had test subjects for both controlled groups. I saw the original Blade Runner 2 days prior. She had not seen it at all. So she was going into this completely fresh and brand new, and she had no idea what was going on. In fact, she was rather apprehensive about seeing the movie in the first place, because she's like, I'm going to be totally lost. And I'm like, baby, just trust me, because after seeing the first movie, there was something in my gut that told me, I think that there's going to be enough in 2049 to kind of have it stand on its own. And now, having seen both movies and her not having seen any, I can say that 2049 has very strong connections to the original film that really ties it very well together. But you can still see 2049 without seeing the original and still follow the plot along, because they managed to have it, to give it legs to stand on its own. Because as soon as the movie was over, I turned to my girlfriend and said, were you able to follow that? And thankfully, she did. She said that there was a couple of terminology here and there, mainly with the replicants, about how they were made and stuff like that, that she was a little sketchy on, but for the most part, she was able to follow the whole through line all the way to the end. And to me, that it kind of spoke volumes, saying that yes, if you have not seen the original film, you can still follow 2049 to its most comprehensive state. Another way that it succeeds in that is that it's visually stunning. Yes, it keeps the tone and the atmosphere that that original film had going for it, especially with the design of its Los Angeles in 2049 with all the neon lights and the advertisement and stuff like that, that some may argue saying, oh yeah, I've seen that before, like in Ghost in the Shell and whatnot, but Blade Runner kind of kicked that off back in '82, so this movie's kind of progressing that while at the same time acknowledging that 30 years has gone by, so there's going to be some slight advancement in technology, while at the same time kind of keeping the continuity intact with certain monitors and stuff like that that kind of have a reminiscent look to how the effects kind of did in 1982, while at the same time never betraying it and never saying, oh, we're past that. Going back to the point that I was making where it kind of stands on its own, if you have not seen that original film and are not familiar with the design choices or the atmosphere or the tone that original film was going for, Blade Runner 2049 is still able to strike it very well, with Roger Deakins at cinematography, Hans Zimmer along with the co-composer doing the score that's very reminiscent of Vangelis' original score from the first movie that's very iconic at this point, and it still holds up while at the same time being different enough to make this kind of like its own adventure 30 years later while still honoring its roots in that sense. And yes, the film is beautiful, so many amazing shots. Granted, much like that original film, it could kind of be a little too self-indulgent with some of those beautiful shots that, again, looking at that 165-minute runtime, I do think that it could have trimmed a little here and there to where they could have cut back like 10 or 15 minutes. But having said that, I can honestly say that I never felt bored, nor did I ever feel like the movie was wearing down on me. This movie is a whole 15 minutes longer than the last Transformers movie, and I still felt comfortable with this, as opposed to Transformers The Last Night, where I was physically starting to hurt from that movie. And much of that credit has to go to this director, who is so far really becoming I'm really think it's going to become a household name with critics and an awful lot of us YouTube movie reviewers, because he's on a home run right. Well, not so much a home run, because I think some of his earlier work could be kind of debatable, especially because of how controversial, well, not so much controversial, but how much of some of his earlier films, like Enemy, for example, starring Jake Gyllenhaal, an awful lot of people are kind of divisive on that one. But this director, I believe his name is pronounced Denis Villeneuve? It's a little hard to pronounce, but so far he's done a movie, like one movie a year. This year he did Blade Runner 2049. Last year he did Arrival. The year before that I think he did Prisoners, or maybe like a couple years prior to that he did Prisoners with Hugh Jackman and Jake Gyllenhaal once more. And then before that he did Enemy and I think one other movie or something like that. And so far he's almost critic proof. He's starting to kind of reach the status of Christopher Nolan, where almost every movie, like, critics are just praising it left and right. And that's because he's starting to kind of take on an auteur type of approach to his filmmaking, to where when you see certain shots from one of his films, you can instantly tell, oh, that's Villeneuve, or however you pronounce his name. And he brings that kind of approach and staple to this movie once more, while tackling the subject matter that's very reminiscent and true to not only the original Blade Runner, but also the novel that's based on. But another reason why I like to credit him an awful lot is also because sometimes when you got a movie with so many great performances, you also got to give a little bit of credit to the director, because sometimes that director is just as responsible for those great performances as the actors were. And Denis Villeneuve, he knows how to get great performances almost out of any actor imaginable from his pedigree of films so far. And of course, from there we can segue over to the acting, which is great. Almost. I say almost because before I get to that, Ryan Gosling, terrific in the central role. Like, he was a character that I actually wanted to continue. He was the one carrying the movie. And he was one of the more responsible parts to this movie that made it just so watchable, where you have an 165-minute runtime, and every time that he's on screen, or every moment that he's in the film where he's trying to investigate something, as I don't want to say slow, but as much as the movie's taking its time with him investigating something that's never feels rushed or edited very haphazardly, because he's like gently walking up to something, because of the way that the movie is kind of dressed with cinematography and set design, but also because of Ryan Gosling's performance. You're right there with him, so you're always captivated and interested in something, whether it's him looking at a little toy horse. There's something interesting about that horse that becomes important later on in the film, but even if he's just looking at it, I'm like, okay, this is integral. There's an important part about this because of the way he's looking at it, and that's a testament to Ryan Gosling's acting. And so many other great actors, ever so often there's like a character actor that you recognize from another movie, but Harrison Ford, he always gets a little bit of shit here and there because people make fun of him because he's like rough. He's coming up in all of these big reboots of the movies that he was in the 80s or whatever, Indiana Jones, Star Wars, whatever. And so many other people have criticized him for kind of mumbling in his movies, and he's like, I'm Harrison Ford, rah, rah. But again, going back to this director, there's a scene where he's able to bring back that old Deckard, and you feel those 30 years weighing on him, especially because of how the events in between both movies kind of unfolded and took a toll on him. You feel that history, and it's a testament to not only the directing, but also Harrison Ford being able to come back as a legitimate actor. Not saying that he wasn't before, but here he shines in a way that I haven't seen him in a good while. But the acting and the writing couldn't have been a straight flush for me personally, and this is probably one of the biggest things about the movie that kept it from being perfect, that kept me from wanting to praise it as much as everybody else is doing right now. And that's gotta be pretty much the whole division that makes up the antagonist for this film. Specifically, Jesus, playing our main villain here, Neander Wallace. Of course, I'm talking about Jared Leto. Always trying to bring on that Jesus complex with the fucking hair and the beard, whatever. Anyways, him along with his secretary slash hit woman, whatever she was, they weren't terrible, but because of how smart the movie was being, because again, it's tackling these central themes with its characters and this internal struggle that they're having that deals with the repercussions that happened at the end of the original Blade Runner. Because of how clever it was being, especially because of how the movie kind of one-ups you in a way. Like 2/3 of the way through, it's like, oh, it pretty much gives us the big you thought that I have ever seen in a film in a long time. So when you bring characters like Jared Leto's character here, Wallace, along with his right-hand woman that were just a little too super villainy, and again, they weren't bad. Like, I've seen worse villains. The villains from Wonder Woman were actually genuinely bad because they were literally writhing their hands going like this. They weren't at that level, thank God. But because of how clever and smart the rest of the film was being, they kind of stood out to me a little bit like those villains were in Wonder Woman. Again, they weren't at that level, but they just seemed in contrast like that because of how much clever the rest of the film was being, that they, to me, whenever they had lines when they were saying like, I'm the best, or oh, I need this one thing for the race to prosper, or something like that. You know, they were being a little over Shakespearean. They stood out to me in that way, and that they took me out of the experience a little bit because of that. But there's no ignoring the fact that this is a wonderfully made film and a really good film that I wanted to love, but ended up liking a really whole lot. I just think that it could have been trimmed a little bit on the length side, and again, that whole aspect about the Tyrell Corporation being brought to the forefront by Jared Leto's character and whatnot could have been handled just a little bit better for my taste. But overall, Blade Runner 2049 is definitely one of the best movies of the year so far. But I will say that it's one of those movies that I would put probably at the bottom of my top 10, if not maybe at an honorable mention, should better things come out later on in the year. So for now, I'm going to be giving Blade Runner 2049 a solid 8 out of 10. It's a really good film. Definitely recommend checking it out because even if you have not seen the original Blade Runner, 2049 stands on its own with a cinematography, great performances, and a very clever script that has you guessing. And having it be a 2 hour and 45-minute film, and then all of a sudden the credits start rolling and I think, oh, that's it? I think you did something really right. So, if you have seen Blade Runner 2049, please let me know in the comments below what you guys thought. Keep it spoiler free because, again, there's an awful lot to digest here. So many little nicks and stuff that was surprisingly kept from the marketing material that I was just like, you know what? That's some Nolan shit right there. And I'm hoping that this director has the power to make more films that can keep that level of secrecy so that when we go to the movies, we have that experience once more of really unfolding scene by scene what this plot is all about. And 2049 was able to give me that experience again, and I think that's awesome. So here's hoping that we get more films like this because, again, it's a dying breed, and I'm hoping that more films come out of this director, as well as from plenty of other directors to take note. In the meantime, however, if you enjoyed this review, please make sure to drop a thumbs down. I'm sorry, not a thumb. No, that's not what I want you to do. I'm tired. Drop a thumbs up down below, along with a comment, a share, and to stay tuned for more videos, make sure you subscribe. Until next time, guys, take care. My brain is fried. I'm just so tired. I'm sorry. Finally, it came to ABC. I watched the episode, and now here are my thoughts on Marvel's Inhumans, which is created by the same guy who created Iron Fist. Jesus Fucking Christ.